Hey, what's up, Logos American History students? Welcome to May 29th, Friday, May 29th. Happy Friday. It's day 45 of our COVID-19 stay-at-home e-learning, and it is Friday. That means yesterday was Thursday. We had a great Zoom meeting, I think, yesterday, talking all about the 60s and the counterculture protests of the 1960s and all the consequences of that. And, that was a good wrap up, I think, to chapter 23, and a good transition into the chapter that we'll be starting today, chapter 24. Because one of the biggest protest movements of the 1960s, of the counterculture, was those people who were protesting the Vietnam War. Of all the things that the hippies did that people had a problem with, protesting the Vietnam War probably pissed off the most people. The Vietnam War really did divide this country into, half the country being supportive of American involvement in Vietnam and half the country being very, very much against it. And it really turned the country, the two sides against each other, ripped us apart in many ways. Besides that, the Vietnam War was just horrible in the cost of lives and money, and just we destroyed that country. And we also destroyed the lives of, hundreds of thousands of Vietnamese, but then also tens of thousands of American soldiers were lost. Tens of thousands more were wounded and messed up for life. So the legacy of the Vietnam War, the longest war in American history, it's not a positive thing. It's a really dark chapter in our history, but it's an important chapter, and hopefully something that, even though it occurred many decades ago, we still need to study it so that we can learn from it, so that we can hopefully not repeat the mistakes. And I think, in hindsight, many people agree that American involvement in Vietnam was filled with mistakes. And so that being said, we're going to start chapter 24 today, and chapter 24 is all about the Vietnam War era in America. So let's go ahead and take a look at our Blackbaud page, where again we got one more Zoom meeting next Thursday. Next week is the last week of the term. So with 1 week left in the term, the goal is to get our grades up as high as possible. If you have any assignments missing, now is the time to get caught up and then keep up with the assignments for the next week, which will be all about chapter 24, which is on the Vietnam War. If we go into the topics tab, we see our new topic, the Vietnam War era. And this era lasted a long time. The first president to get us involved in Vietnam was President Eisenhower. Remember, we go back to Eisenhower. He's president in the 50s, right? We start with Eisenhower. We go through Kennedy. Johnson, Lyndon Johnson, really gets us involved. We didn't talk too much about Lyndon Johnson in the other chapters that we're talking about, 1960s. We'll talk a lot about Lyndon Johnson when it comes to the Vietnam War. That's really his major legacy. But then even after Johnson, it continued into the Nixon, and really we weren't completely out of Vietnam until after President Ford took over for Nixon. So long time we were involved there, and a lot of bad stuff happened, right? This was the last time we had a draft, and a lot of men were sent over to Vietnam to fight against their will. They didn't want to go. They didn't want to go do what we did in Vietnam. But the question that we're going to try and answer with today's reading, the first section, is how did we get there in the first place, right? And so that's chapter 24, section 1, which we got the download right there. If we click on the download, we see, what is the title of this section? The War Unfolds. The War Unfolds. The Vietnam War, if you remember the Korean War, it's similar in that nature because it has to do with communism, right? Remember, the Korean War is all about North versus South, communist North versus non-communist South, and America was on the side of the non-communists. Vietnam War, communist North Vietnam, non-communist South. And why were we there? Because we were trying to keep communists, just like in Korea, from taking over the entire country. Now, Vietnam is a very small, pretty insignificant country, but we were so against communism that letting Vietnam become a communist country, we could not let happen. At least that's how the government felt. It has to do with something that this section talks about called the domino theory. This section of the book has, in my opinion, the most messed up photo you will see on any page in this textbook, right? I mean, it's a high school textbook, so it's, you can see a lot of messed up stuff on the internet, right? But a high school textbook, you expect to see kind of a sanitized version. They censor it a little bit. But I want to show you this photograph because it's disturbing and it's real, right? This is a Buddhist monk in South Vietnam who has set himself on fire as a form of protest against a dictator in South Vietnam. This dictator in South Vietnam, who treated Buddhists very badly, so badly that it led one to self-immolate himself in protest, we supported him. That was our guy, this dictator, right? Why did we support him? Because he was against communists. He was against Buddhists, but he's also against communists. And so this is the start. This is before we even start sending troops, right? This is what's going on in Vietnam, and this is what we're supporting. America's supporting this, right? So this was a mess from the very beginning, and it just got messier and messier and messier. And that's what we're going to see as we go through this chapter, as we just get deeper and deeper into this muck, this quagmire of Vietnam. So as you read this section, you'll see how we got there in the first place and how gradually we got more and more involved in this big mess. We got more and more soldiers in this country, and the soldiers weren't really sure why they were there, and the people of Vietnam weren't sure why they were there, but they were pretty sure that they didn't want them there, and that's understandable. Would you want foreign troops in your country? Oh no, we're here to help. Really? But that's what these reading comprehension questions get into, and that's really what the question of the day gets into. So let's take a look at the question of the day. Of course, we have our assignment tab. If we go under assignment tab, we got chapter 24, section 1, which is today's reading that we were just looking at. And then we have our question of the day. And the question of the day, if we click on that, what is it? When, if ever, do you think America should get involved with the internal affairs of other nations? How should America go about this? Why or why not? I'm not saying that we should always just mind our business. There are some countries that, messed up stuff happens. And if America can do something to stop it, should we? I think maybe we should. There are countries where they need America's help and they want America's help. Should we? Yeah, right? But then there are other times where we stick our noses in other people's business when we really shouldn't. And Vietnam might be a great example of that. But I want to know what you guys think, right? When should we or shouldn't we get involved in the internal affairs of other countries? Let me know what you think. And as always, if you have any questions or concerns, let me know. Otherwise, have a good weekend. We'll see you on Monday.